beginning of the end of decade number 1 for the Marvel Cinematic Universe is now in theaters. My review has run, so now let's take a look back at how all 28 official MCU films, TV shows, and Netflix series released between the original Iron Man and Infinity War actually stack up against each other according to me, basically. Starting at the bottom and working our way up with... Why are you so bad, Iron Fist? You should have been fun. You should have been one of the most fun things in this entire bigger thing, and instead you were Iron Fist. Just Iron Fist. A giant pile of unforced errors, cultural appropriation, and bad ideas. How do you screw up magic ninja death cult as a villain concept? Yeah, I know, they probably only did this because the weird, shady dude who runs the TV and comic side of Marvel was obsessed with turning Inhumans into an X-Men replacement, so they didn't need Fox and they had to throw something together to make him happy, but jeez, what a half-assed mess this was, huh? How do you have a magic teleporting bulldog and still not have that be at least a decent show? Hey, you remember when the Phase 1 Marvel movies were sort of a mixed bag and then it all came together perfectly in their first crossover because everyone's best attributes were well balanced and they went with the bad guy that was almost everyone's favorite thing about the whole project so far as the big unifying threat, and then the Netflix shows looked at that and made their first crossover all about the bullshit no one cared about from Iron Fist? Yeah. You know, I know people think Natalie Portman got the raw deal in the Thor movies, and she totally did, but if we're giving a second shot to anyone from that supporting cast, I'd honestly rather have Kat Denning come back. Also, this movie is definitely the most forgettable of these that's not technically bad, but still pretty close to bad. This movie sure is lucky that Robert Downey Jr., Mickey Rourke, Don Cheadle, Scarlett Johansson, Clark Gregg, Samuel L. Jackson, Jon Favreau, Gwyneth Paltrow are also entertaining in it, because it's kind of a mess and a lot of jogging in place, and we totally didn't notice at the time right away because it was so cool that Captain America's shield and Mjolnir were there, right? Still, better part 2 than Thor got, but only barely. I'm sorry guys, I still don't think it was very good. No, not because it's not as good as the Sam Raimi movies, it's not though, or because they should have just recognized the best way to go would be to cut the loss on Peter Parker and jump straight to Miles Morales, which they totally should have done, but it's just not a great film. I like the actors, I like the diverse supporting cast, that's very refreshing, I like the little high school teenager details, that's all great, but all of that stuff are these tiny little beats while most of the movie is just a dull, generic action thing that mostly feels like one of the lesser X-Men movies. I'm sorry, I hope the next one's better. Not as good as the first one, but not bad. Kinda suffers from being overly serious, but not really having anywhere to go with story because we're kind of in the middle of everyone else's story. Like Civil War was the place to go serious because it's an endpoint for part of the Captain America storyline, but what part of the first Avengers realized was that the event team-ups work best when you assume they're meant to be these big celebratory fireworks parties, even if the story is technically about the world being in peril. I mean, there's stuff I like in this one, but it's definitely flawed. A sharply observed narrative about black identity, neighborhood history, police violence, generational cycles of abuse, and political corruption in the outline of a superhero series that kinda runs out of gas when it subs in an uninteresting secondary villain for the last couple episodes. Pretty good though, great lead actor, hell of a soundtrack. I still have a lot of fun with this one. It really works as a monster movie, and it's the first Phase 1 film before First Avenger where all the universe connections feel organic and well used. I hope we get Tim Blake Nelson back in the series at some point. Okay, so I think my favorite Punisher personally is always going to be the Warzone movie, which is just a note-perfect adaptation of the original comics and a great flick, but I also mostly dig what they did here. I mean, look, rock in a hard place. We're just not in a world right now where the Captain Second Amendment version of the Punisher that's just a pissed-off white dude in a van full of machine guns can be a superhero. So taking the fact that being a military veteran now makes Frank Castle not just unusual among superheroes, but misunderstood and unusual in society at large, and making that the subject, reimagining the Punisher as the Veterans Affairs superhero for the MCU, that I'm interested in. It's a good angle. I like where the series went. I want to see more. Consequential, yes, no, sometimes the cast has made the difference in this one. Season 1 was okay, Season 2 was great, Season 3 was not, Season 4 was alright when Ghost Rider and the Framework stuff was the focus, but overall I think this is the most underappreciated of the ones that are actually good. Is the Netflix Daredevil series only half of a good show? Yes. Yes, it is. Is it the half of season 1 when it's mainly about the Kingpin and the half of season 2 when it's mainly about the Punisher? Yes. Those parts are really fucking good though, right? Yeah, they are. That whole stretch in the prison, killing the dude with the car door, sick! Almost makes up for the fact that Matt Murdock is an uninteresting cipher and that the MCU Elektra is a totally boring betrayal of her character with no agency of her own. Yeah, I know season 2 was bad. Season 1 was good enough that it didn't really matter. They should get Haley Atwell back into the rest of this somehow, though. Now, go watch season 1 because I know a lot of you didn't. My favorite memory of this movie is that, as tends to happen, I got cornered by a bunch of other Boston area movie critics to be pumped for background info on the comics before the press screening, and like 6 people totally refused to believe that I wasn't joking about Doctor Strange just being the guy's actual name. Like, no, really, his name is Stephen Strange and he's a doctor, like, of medicine. Also, the movie, pretty good, right? It's fun, it moves, it's not over long, the fight when he's a ghost is nutty, and all that kaleidoscope, backwards time, I've come to bargain stuff, that really works. I like how everyone was really surprised when this came out that it was basically a kids movie. Like, we were still so used to every goddamn superhero thing trying to do the gritty Dark Knight business that it was this huge shock that the one about the space Viking who needs to learn how to be a good boy before he can have his magic hammer back wasn't aimed exclusively at dour, grumpy adult men. I know we're supposed to act like it was some big injustice that Edgar Wright lost this project and that his version would have been so much better and some kind of all-time automatic classic, but Ant-Man was a lot of fun even if it's right on the line for the less consequential ones. All the action beats are fun, the cast works, the gag with Thomas and the entire final sequence really are all top shelf, and I really do think this being as good as it was is what softened the landing for Ultron having been kind of a disappointment a few months before. How freaking great are the Captain America movies that the first one is significantly less good than the second and third, but still one of the best superhero movies ever made, especially among period superhero movies. I just have no idea what we're going to do when Chris Evans decides he doesn't want to do this anymore. It really feels like we might have another Christopher Reeve, Superman, Clayton Moore, Lone Ranger situation where no one is ever going to be able to properly step into Steve Rogers again. Like, the US government should really think about issuing him the official title and the shield for real now. I mean, Lord knows we're eventually going to need the image rehabilitation. The one that changed everything and started it all still totally runs out of gas and becomes a completely forgettable movie the minute he's finished flying to that village and blowing up all the terrorist guys. But those first 2 acts, yeah, still pretty great, still holds up. Downey, still iconic. The small country I'm sure Disney will eventually buy him, probably worth it. I keep being worried that this one is going to stop holding up or start to feel gimmicky, but nah, it just cooks every time. All the business at the airport is so much fun, then that big Act 3 twist and that final fight. Hot damn, what a solid Part 3 this was. Remember back when making a space movie about characters nobody had ever heard of, where the most normal seeming one was a guy constantly dancing to 70s mom rock seemed like the craziest risk a studio could possibly be taking with one of these movies, and a movie where Superman fought Batman felt like a sure thing that couldn't possibly fail? Life is funny. A hard-drinking, hard-loving, harder-living lady detective for whom being superhuman mostly just means being able to suffer the indignities of female marginalization more extensively battles the humanoid personification of rape culture. You know, because the Marvel movies and shows are just shallow fluff that aren't about anything. This one has jokes. So many jokes. All the jokes. Just a big, wacky, nutty, inconsequential, jokey joke fest with no greater depth or point at all. Ha! Bright colors and one-liners and slapstick and Jeff Goldblum. Ha ha! Its overarching narrative completely upends the foundational morality of its entire franchise in favor of a radicalized message positing that the legacy of colonialism is so innately toxic that any civilization built on it can only be redeemed by its destruction regardless of any attempts made to make amends in the aftermath. Ha ha ha! Funny jokes in silly movies that aren't about stuff. Whenever I'm feeling a little bit down, I think about how the mighty Shane Black solved the problem of Iron Man's most famous villain being a racist caricature you probably can't put in a movie anymore, and I feel a little bit better. And whenever I feel a lot down, I think about how diaper-shreddingly pissed off some of you still are about it, and I feel great. Thanos the movie, guest starring the Marvel Universe, is pretty fucking good, right? That ending, that final shot, nuts! I just posted a full review, so go watch that. Moving on. So I actually lost my father about 7 months ago, and yeah, I'm just gonna need us to move on to the next movie, please. Yeah. Yeah, this one still holds up like nobody's business. It was a hell of a thing to see this the first time and realize, oh, so that's how they got Robert Redford to finally do one of these. Doesn't get any better than that. Okay, I mean, actually it does get better because there's one more movie on this list, but still, you know what I mean. Even after all this time later, The Avengers remains as Star Wars, Jaws, Raiders, Terminator 2, Wizard of Oz, King Kong, Singing in the Rain. Yeah, one of those movies were different after these moments. You can't overstate what it means or how well it still holds up. Just still freaking magic stuff, man. Why do these keep working? Because they keep making decisions like this. Sure, Black Panther, the guy, you could have made an interesting enough movie out of, what with the suit and the powers and whatnot, sure, but to look at the background stuff, the supporting cast, the place he comes from, the component parts of his world, and realizing, you know, we've made a lot of these superhero movies and we could probably make another one fine, but nobody has really tried to make an Afrofuturist sci-fi fantasy epic, certainly not one set in Africa with an almost entirely black cast and a super politically charged villain story. That kind of thinking, the willingness to follow through on it, and the talent to pull it off is how you make movies that rewrite the rules and maybe change the world a little bit. And also make like $1 billion and counting. Alright, that's the rankings. Do you agree? Great. Disagree? Fine. I probably will in a week or two as well. And no, I'm not going to redo this whole thing when Ant-Man and the Wasp comes out in a few. Now, go see Infinity War and make your own list so you won't feel left out.